about legal fraternal surrender.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the videos or the video series that got a lot of people who kind of pride themselves on just super logical thinking,
Yeah.
like integral math. I don't know if you know him, the Justicar, and
No, but I remember thinking to myself, how come I haven't thought of this logic before? Like, it just made so much sense to me, and yet I was like, oh my God, how come I mean, I've always sort of thought of myself as a pretty critical thinker, but the argument that you're making was just so like, but I mean, obviously you were very eloquent in your delivery, and I have to admit I'm a little intimidated just because you're so good with your words. I mean, it's an honor, but it's also like kind of intimidating, I guess, at the same time.
oh, pshaw.
No, I'm serious. I'm not trying to kiss your butt. I mean, like, really, I'm just really happy that you're speaking with me today, and I'm happy that the work that you are doing.
Oh
So,
well, don't be intimidated because I've only had half a cup of coffee so far,
okay.
and that means generally that I can barely form a coherent thought. So.
Okay. Um, so, um, so I guess just to set it up, the context of which I'm trying to present to write a piece is mostly about rape culture and how feminists view rape and some of the problems with the definitions and terminology and what the men's rights movement is trying to do to correct that. But I did have some general questions that I just sort of wanted to get out of the way first.
Sure.
And all of this spawned from like I have a feminist professor for one of my classes.
Oh,
And,
I'm sorry.
my eye twitches every time she tries to integrate some of her feminist philosophy in our lessons. But
What's she teaching you?
she's teaching us qualitative research methods.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So yeah, but anyway, I do hear a lot of feminists talk about their aim in deconstructing gender norms, and I definitely think there's a discussion that should take place about gender, but I often find it very interchangeable with the term sex, and how people just use it so like when we're referring to gender, what they're really talking about is sex, and
Yeah.
and I'm just sort of wondering with the word feminism, like why not just stick to women's rights? Like I don't call myself a masculinist to support men's rights.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I'm not sure whether feminism was something that the movement picked for itself. I know that it was originally in the 60s called the Women's Liberation Movement.
Right.
They may not have actually slapped that sticker on themselves. It may have been slapped on them by the media.
Yeah.
So, but one thing that I find just really interesting is how reluctant women who have identified as feminist are to discard the label, to keep all of the beliefs that they have, which often are completely inconsistent with the sort of the positions of scholarly or academic or political feminism. Right? These are women who really are for equality,
Right.
but they just can't bring themselves to stop calling themselves feminists, and
Right. Right.
it's just bizarre. I mean, like the moment that we have in the MRM some nutter who shoots a bunch of people or you know bombs a building or something like that, declaring it to be part of his activism, that will probably be the moment that I stop calling myself ever an MRA.
Right. Right.
I'll still do what I do, but I won't do it as part of a movement.
Well, and it's tough because labels they can be very liberating, and I guess I'm thinking more about like gay people coming out of the closet. It can be very liberating for people to put a label on them, but at the same time, it's also very limiting because some people can only see them as that. So it's sticky. But I've had the same experience when doing my research that a lot of feminists that I interview, they like I I'm not that kind of feminist. I'm not, you know.
Yeah, but it's just like, if there's, I just got into this online just the other day, if there's a million different kinds of feminists
Right.
or feminism, and some of them are diametrically opposed to each other, like say the trans inclusive versus trans exclusive,
Right.
or equity feminists versus, radical feminists, right?
Right.
Why would you like I and it makes criticism of feminism next to impossible because all they have to do is say, well, that's only a small, you know, group of nuts who are doing those things. The majority of the silent majority of feminists are not like that. And it's like, yeah, but you're also silent. And whenever somebody actually points out what these people over here are doing, you say, well, you can't criticize feminism, rather than saying, yeah, that's pretty screwy what they're doing. Let's oppose them together. It is a way of, it really is a way, the label is a way of aligning yourself with a larger group.
Yeah.
And so when somebody from the outside that group comes in and starts criticizing individual members, like feminists fight amongst each other all the time.
Yeah.
Right? But when somebody from outside comes in and starts to criticize people in the in group, then you get almost this knee-jerk need to protect the members of the group.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the unfortunate consequences of taking a label on yourself and aligning yourself with other people who have that label. So
yeah, well, and I would also say, especially when the label itself is supposedly synonymous with women's rights.
Yeah.
No, it's not. So, but can I ask you, what's your biggest? I mean, you consider yourself an anti-feminist to a certain extent, although I'm sure you would not label yourself as such, exclusively. But what's your biggest gripe with feminism? If you had to pick one of the double standards, inconsistencies, or just overall take, what's your biggest gripe with feminism?
Oh God, there's just so many to choose from. Their inability to, I mean, they seem to have this complete inability, a lot of them, to look at a piece of evidence that's very, very clear, right? And say, okay, right? That evidence exists and it says what you are saying it says, right? Like, take, for instance, the CDC's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey and how they separated forced sexual intercourse into two different categories depending on whether the victim was penetrated or whether the victim was forced to penetrate, right?
Right. Actually, I was just reading something on Reddit about that, how...
yeah. Which means that half of all of the previous year victims of forced sexual intercourse don't count as rape victims, right? And they are exclusively men, right? And they are, the majority of the perpetrators are women in those cases.
Yeah.
And so you basically, you can show them this piece of evidence that the CDC has done this to intentionally marginalize men on the advice of a feminist who consulted for them, Mary Koss. And her explanation of why these two situations are different it kind of boils down to, well, it's just different. These men might have sort of felt like they were coerced, but they were just ambivalent about their own sexual desires. So it really wasn't.
Read segment on that.
Yeah, it really wasn't coercion, and or force, and so, and they will turn around, and when you want to use that as a source for the actual counting of rape victims, and you say, okay, so half of all rape victims last year, were men. They'll say, but you said that wasn't a credible source. That the CDC wasn't a credible source because they, they're fudging the numbers, blah, 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 blah. It's like, or they will write these big, long, huge blog posts. I think David Futrell did one, as to why what's there in front of his face doesn't exist. It doesn't actually exist. right? And they go through these incredible mental gymnastics just to be able to not see something that's right in front of their nose. And I don't even know if it's intentional. Like, I don't know if it's a conscious thing that they're saying, well, yeah, I got, uh, that's absolutely the case. I got to think up some big rationale as to why it's not actually the case.
Yeah, well, I imagine it's definitely, I guess cognitive dissonance is the,
yeah,
um, I think, and I talked to my professor about this when I interviewed her about if there be, should there be a gender neutral definition of rape, and she said no. To my surprise, I definitely considered her to be a little bit more of an equity feminist, but I guess she is deep in it because she said no, there should not be a gender neutral definition. It's apples and oranges. Men are built differently. They're bigger and stronger, etc. But I'm just thinking, well, so what? Are women incapable of using a knife or a frying pan or any kind of coercion? Like,
yeah.
it's there are different kinds of rape or sexual assault or however you want to treat.
Well, look at it this way. In the Congo, one of the things that the militants would do was come into a house and point a gun at the family members and force these family members to have sex. Right? Force a father to have sex with his daughter, or a son to have sex with his mother, or a brother and sister, right? And Eve Ensler, in her keynote address at a recent NOW conference, she basically said they were forcing fathers to rape their daughters and forcing sons to rape their mothers. But those men were also raped. They were being forced at gunpoint to have sex.
Yeah.
Right? They weren't raping anyone.
Right.
They were also victims. If somebody had come in with a gun and forced two women to perform sex acts, we would consider both of those women victims of sexual violence.
Right.
So it just strikes me as just bizarre. It's like a wall in their conscience or consciousness that slams down.
Well, and it's just to play devil's advocate, I agree with you 100%. But just to play devil's advocate, some of the feminists I speak to, well, it's a different act, and it's somewhat analogous to, well, he got an erection, so he must have enjoyed it. It's more a male being forced to rape is more comfortable than a female forced to get raped. It's not as a violent or intrusive act. What would you say to that?
I don't know. I heard one story, a personal story from someone. I think the post was, "What's the worst sexual experience you've ever had?" or something like that. And he told a story about passing out drunk at a party in a bedroom, and he woke up and he had this horrible searing pain in his penis, and there was a woman having sex with him on top of him, and she finally just kind of gave up and put on her clothes and left, and he's still in horrible pain. And he staggers into the bathroom and he finds that she had, in order to get him to be erect enough to, perform, she had taken a Q-tip, stripped the cotton off of it, and inserted it in his urethra. And he said 2 years later he still has pain when he urinates.
Dear God.
Right? And I don't know whether he considered himself to be a victim of sexual violation or rape, at least not until he had this conversation on Reddit. Because it's sort of like men, they sort of almost are programmed to take responsibility in sexual situations. And so if they are violated or victimized or taken advantage of or forced into something, they do, I don't know whether it's a socialization or whether it's an instinctive need to feel responsible for oneself and in control and feel like an agent, right? But they often translate those situations into one where they had a certain amount of control and they let something happen to them.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways that's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and I would agree with you that it's maybe a combination of both, socialization and biology. But just for the record, then you agree there should be a gender-neutral definition of rape or sexual assault?
Well, I almost want to get rid of the word rape altogether. It's, after 4 years of doing this, I don't even. I probably have uttered the word rape millions of times. It's getting a little bit stale. And on top of that, it's such a emotionally fraught word. It's just loaded with all kinds of historical baggage. And I mean, like, when you think of sexual assault, it's not quite so much the sort of the horrifying, skin crawling kind of word or term. And with rape, it evokes the image of a woman being pinned down by a soldier while her village burns,
or like
right?
With a ski mask and a knife to her throat in an alleyway.
Yeah, and since 80% or more cases of rape of women don't go down like that, it just kind of, it seems to me to be one of those things that maybe we should just ditch the word altogether.
Yeah, well, and Canada has. I want to get into that specifically, but so and that's one of my questions later on is like, where can I find credible studies that show exactly that 80% of the cases of rape don't go down like the traditional classic. Where can I find studies like that? It's more of like a dispute of consent or whatever.
I think RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network.
Yep.
I think they have. I'm sure that they've cited their sources. They have a sort of a list of facts about rape, and I think that they agree that about 80%. I think most feminists would also agree that about 80% or more of rapes are generally in a party/hookup scenario or acquaintance or dating situation, right?
Right.
Or between relationship partners. So, yeah.
So okay, well then, as far as Canada is concerned, I mean, I'm looking at this on the surface, thinking, hey, we don't use the word rape in any legal term, and apparently we recognize males as victims of sexual assault. Problem solved?
No. Well, I mean, there was an interesting case a few years ago. It was called RVJA. Went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and it basically the Supreme Court's decision rendered criminal a whole bunch of normal acts that occur between married people. Any sexual touching while a partner is asleep is now illegal in Canada, by the way.
Really?
Yes. So caressing.
So it's illegal to touch your partner while they're sleeping?
To sexually touch them while they're sleeping.
Oh.
Yeah. Even if they asked you to do it before they went to sleep. Even if they said, I want you to wake me up by giving me head, or I want you to...
oh my God,
yeah,
really?
or I want you to kiss me before you leave in the morning. That's all criminal now. I mean, like, are those cases going to go to the criminal courts? I'd likely no, but they do provide a nice open door for people who are going to make a malicious accusation for a bad reason, right? And one of the most hilarious things is that it was actually based on what later turned out to be a false accusation. And
this is a case you're referring to?
Yes, the false accusation was that these two people who were heavy into BDSM, they'd been together for a while, for years, and they were having some kinky sex, and I guess they liked to do the whole choking thing, asphyxiation thing. And he choked her until she was unconscious. She was unconscious for about 3 minutes. He did some stuff to her while she was unconscious that they had agreed on in advance. And then she woke up and they continued to have sex. And then about 2 months later, they get into an argument and break up, and he threatens to seek custody of their son. So she goes to the police and reports that 2 months ago while she was unconscious, he did things to her that she had not agreed to. Okay? And he was convicted. And then he appealed, and in the appeal, what came out that no, he hadn't gone beyond the scope of her consent. Yes, she had agreed to everything in advance. Yes, she lied because she didn't want him to get custody of their son, right? So the conviction was overturned. Okay, but in the decision, one of the three appellate court judges asked the question, is it actually legally, is there any legal veracity in the idea of giving consent in advance to sexual activities, sexual things that will happen to you when you're unconscious?
Yeah.
And because he asked that question, right, it had to go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that no advance consent to stuff that will happen when sexual things that will happen to you when you're unconscious is not a valid concept in under Canadian consent law. Consent has to be contemporaneous, it has to be constant, ongoing, and conscious, right? And so the moment you lose consciousness, your consent is null and void, it's vitiated, right? Until you are conscious again. In the dissenting opinion, the judge who wrote the dissenting opinion, he repeatedly states that our consent laws, Canadian consent law, was designed to protect women from things that they did not agree to, right? It was designed to protect women from blah, 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 to protect women from blah, blah, blah. The entire basis of our sexual assault laws are designed to protect women, right? And he said, now we are protecting women from their own decisions. I don't agree with that, right?
Wow.
But the entirety of his dissent focused on the fact that the entirety of sexual assault law is there to protect women from being violated.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So, I mean, you still have this heavy, informal bias, like even that one case in Nova Scotia, where the guy poked holes in the condoms.
Yeah, I think I remember reading about that, yeah.
Yeah, and he was convicted of aggravated sexual assault. Right, aggravated because it resulted in injury. She got pregnant, she had an abortion. And the judge there basically stipulated in his decision that this case can in no way provide a precedent. This is why I'm making this decision, and none of these reasons could be used for this case to be a precedent for prosecuting women who lie about being on birth control.
Well, I was just going to say, that's pretty ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't flow the other way.
No.
Wow.
Even though there are lifelong consequences for men when women lie about being on birth control.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So,
oh boy, where was I now? Okay, I'm moving into campus life and the adjudication process. I was actually just speaking with somebody at because I go to Humber.
huh?
I was talking with somebody who is an investigator in cases of sexual assault, and I was wondering, why even have an adjudication process? Is there a problem with that? Just the whole idea of there being an adjudication process on campus and the standard of proof being a balance of probabilities, not reasonable doubt?
I would even go for something like the clear and convincing evidence. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a little much to ask in a non-judiciary setting, non-court setting. But clear and convincing evidence would be 80% certainty, approximately, right? But part of me is they should get out of the business of adjudicating these things altogether. In particular because they are not trained to be unbiased. They're actually trained to be biased. Even to the point where, at least in the U.S., in the training manuals, it actually says things like, if a man is persuasive and logical in telling his side of the story, this is usually a sign of his guilt. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I kid you not. Right? So, I mean, if he tells a clear, convincing, rational story about how he was at an ATM in another state when this rape was supposedly happening, he's probably guilty because he's being calm and persuasive.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you know. But so you have that. But then again, I mean, there is an issue with HR departments tend to deal with sexual harassment complaints in companies. They will suspend an employee. They will fire an employee based on sexual harassment complaints and sexual misconduct complaints. So, I mean, there is sort of a premise or a reason why universities would have a process for trying to figure out whether there was something bad that happened and whether somebody should be removed from the university. Um, and especially in the States with Title IX, um, the way it has been interpreted by the OCR, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, any being subject to harassment or sexual misconduct or any kind of sexual assault creates a hostile learning environment and limits educational opportunities and is a violation of the uh, sort of equal opportunities legislation that Title IX is, right? That men and women should have equal opportunity to participate in education. So, I don't know that universities could possibly figure out a way to get around it and not have these hearings, right? And leave it to the police. And there's also the issue of women don't. They have the option. Victims of sexual assault have the option of whether they want to go to the police or not. A
Right.
lot of the ones that make an accusation to the university administration, they don't want to go to the police, right? So then you have, if the university's not going to deal with it, who's going to deal with it? And if you do actually have a sexual predator on your campus, um, you do want to get rid of that person. You do want them out of there because they're endangering your students.
But wait a minute, I'm confused. If Are you saying that if a woman goes to her university or judiciary affairs or whatever the department is called, she can lodge a formal complaint with her university and not wish to go forward in legal?
Sorry, and not wish to. Sorry, you there?
Yeah, sorry. I'm asking if whether she can lodge a formal complaint with the university, but choose not to lodge a formal complaint with the proper authorities.
Yeah, absolutely. She can choose to do one or the other or both. If she
wouldn't the police or the proper authorities intervene anyway, like they would in domestic violence cases? I know that if a call is made to 911 and they come over to the home, no matter what, they're going to take somebody away with them, just out of, like, that's their policy, regardless of whether we come there and like, oh, everything's fine now, we had a bit of a disagreement, but everything's fine. As I understand, they're still going to take somebody away just as a precautionary measure. Why wouldn't the authorities step in and say, well, you lodged a formal complaint with the university, we don't care if you're not willing to take it further, we're taking it from here?
Well, this is the thing. Here's one interesting tidbit that you might not know. You might have heard that there's this huge scandal because there's tens of thousands of rape kits sitting on shelves in labs that have not been tested, right? Across the U.S., they've not been tested, and that this is like evidence of the police, the criminal justice system's ineffectuality as far as prosecuting rape cases, right? That it's a lack of political will on the part of the system to prosecute these cases. But here's the thing. It wasn't that long ago, I forget how many years ago, basically they changed things so that it used to be that when a woman got in and got a rape kit done, if she did not involve the police, if she did not make a report to police, she would get a bill in the mail for $800 or something like that for that rape kit. Okay? They changed the law, right, and basically made hospitals have to do a rape kit for free. whether the woman went to the police or not. So all of these rape kits that are sitting untested, right, are rape kits that were done by women who then chose not to report the crime to the police, right? And this is, of course, presented as a lack of political will on the part of the police, when in reality, it's because now every woman can get a free rape kit done, and then at some point in the future, if she decides to report, it's there, right? And I do think that that's actually a good thing, because I think that with underreporting as it is, after you've been assaulted, you have a very narrow window to get the rape kit done. You have a little bit more time to weigh your options if you do get a rape kit done, to weigh your options and sort of feel a little bit better and start feeling stronger, and then maybe a week later or 2 weeks later report the incident to the police. Then the evidence is there. But a lot of these women are just not going forward and reporting, right?
Right.
And feminists are holding these untested kits up as evidence that the police don't want to prosecute rapists, when in reality it's evidence that women who now can get a free rape kit are not reporting the incident to the police. So if the police are not even called when a woman goes to the hospital and gets a rape kit done, right, unless she wishes it.
See, I would think that, if you are willing to lodge a formal complaint with a university or a college, or you're willing to go to a hospital and get a rape kit, assessment, it's sort of like, I would imagine to be, well, sorry, I mean, we're not necessarily going to publish any of this, but we need to document it, and we need, the authorities need to be involved. It's sort of like somebody comes in with a bullet in their shoulder, and they don't want the authorities to be involved.
Well, yeah, but the authorities have to be involved. If there's a gunshot wound in the United States, I think that the emergency department has to call police.
And that's my point, though, right?
Yeah.
Is that you can't have the option to say, well, I feel strongly enough that I got raped, but I don't feel strongly enough to report it to legal authorities.
Yeah, no, but this is the whole idea of treating rape as a special crime, treating it as different, unique. That we have to basically make every single possible accommodation to the victims to minimize the negative impacts of their experience, right?
Yeah.
And you even see this when I got basically smacked by a whole bunch of feminists when I had the temerity to say, why aren't we putting some social pressure on victims? When you know that 90% of rapes, at least on campuses, are committed by recidivists, and same goes for the military, right? By men who do this, at least rapes of women by men, who do this over and over and over again, right? When you know this, why are we not putting some pressure on victims to have the social responsibility, right? Have some sense of responsibility toward his past victims and his future victims, right? To go and report.
No, I mean...
And I got the whole, she's been so traumatized, and you're telling her that she has to go subject herself to this horrible, re-victimization and this grueling process, and, how inhuman are you? And I'm thinking about the next woman who's going to find herself alone in a room with this guy.
Right? If they really felt like this is, they're really violating, why wouldn't they want to come forward? I mean, it's not like we're living in the 1950s anymore, where they are afraid for their lives, their husband might kill them. I mean, maybe that stuff still exists. Maybe they are genuinely afraid of coming forward because of retaliation from their husband or whatever, but I just don't see that really as a valid argument anymore.
No,
I would agree with you.
It's not being afraid of...
enough, they would come forward. There's so much protections now. There's so many support groups and hotlines. I mean, why wouldn't they come forward? They're going to be protected, right?
Well, it's not that they're scared of retaliation. Most of the reasons why women don't report is these days is they just want to put it behind them. They just want to get on with their lives. A lot of them are just like, it wasn't that traumatic, wasn't traumatic enough to go through all of the trouble, right? They don't want their family to know, right? Things like that. It's not about being scared of somebody coming and beating you up because you
Yeah.
reported them. No, that's none of those reasons really exist statistically. I'm sure maybe for one or two in a small number of cases, but so and another thing that feminists constantly tell us is that women don't come forward because they're afraid they won't be believed. But that's not even among the current list of top reasons why women don't report. It used to be, and now it's not. And
Where can I find? I mean, sorry to interrupt, but
actually, Community of the Wrongly Accused has a lot of information on that, and I can probably dig up some articles there. He usually cites them quite well. So
no, I know. I read their blog often, so.
yeah, and but as far as not coming forward, uh, a lot of women feel like he's not going to get convicted anyway. Okay, but who's telling them that, right? Who's telling them that constantly? It's feminists, right? Feminists saying, only 3% of rapists ever spend a day in jail, right? Only 6% of rape reports result in conviction, right?
Well, and this is what I was going to get at. Is 3% of the alleged victims themselves disagree with them being raped, and at least 40% of them going back to the relationship with the supposed perpetrator. Where can I get some credible studies, and how are these rape statistics skewed?
Oh, credible studies are hard to come by. They often exist behind paywalls, which is really lovely.
Oh, God. Yeah.
But there's a good journal called Sex Rolls. I think it's published by Springer, and they have a fair amount of good sort of. This is what they do. This is their entire purpose, is to look at human sexual behavior and all of that, right?
Right.
They have a number of studies on female sexual aggression, and it's actually quite surprising in sort of campus populations that women are actually more likely to be sexually aggressive than men are. So,
Right, so their aggression might be more passive, I guess.
well, it's certainly seen as more passive. I mean, like, look at it this way: if you have, there was this video. It was sort of a prank video that was posted on Reddit a couple of days ago that showed a woman just going up to random people in this London subway station or something like that, and twerking against them. Right?
Oh, yeah, I remember. I never saw it. I do remember reading that headline, though, yeah.
Yeah, and can you imagine if a guy went up and started dry humping random people in the subway?
Yeah.
Right? He would be seen as dangerous and like a predator and creepy and gross and horrible. But, women can get away with doing the exact same things and not seem quite so intimidating and not seem quite so much of a danger, right? So I think that it's not so much that they are more passive in their aggression. It's how we see it as being somehow different. We don't see an aggressive intent behind their behavior, or a malicious intent behind their behavior. So.
Well, and it's tough because men and women are different, right? And sexual dimorphism, the way that we're physiologically and biologically hardwired, and people look at these stereotypes. Oh, men are bigger and stronger than women. Therefore, it's okay if a woman hits a man, or it's okay if a woman makes these kinds of acts against a man because it's just different. It's apples and oranges or whatever. Right?
Well, we almost see it like a child hitting an adult.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's harmless. And of course the adult is in control of the situation and can just, put his foot down and make that child stop,
yeah.
Right? If it gets out of hand, right? So, I mean, like we just, and I think this has that the way we see that has more to do with our sort of phenotypical the differences, the sexual dimorphism, but not so much the size and strength, but what our faces look like and what our bodies are shaped like. Even things like having facial hair is, you know, men tend to they shed more of their childlike features as they grow into adulthood,
Yeah.
and they take on more differentiated between childhood and adulthood, more differentiated features. And because of that, I think we generally see women, we take them less seriously in a lot of contexts. And one of those contexts is when they're being violent and aggressive.
Right.
So,
I wanted to ask you about rain because there's been some recent. I remember reading the article and I couldn't find it, but basically there was some question as to whether they were recanting their position on rape culture. Is there any good news of this, or is it just sort of a red herring, and MRAs are reading into it too much?
I think that MRAs are definitely being overly optimistic about it. There is something to be said for Rain coming out and saying not they didn't, I don't think, say that rape culture is an invalid concept. What they basically said was that it is not helpful. It's not helpful. It's not useful to frame the discussion on rape in terms of a nebulous culture that encourages it. It takes responsibility off of perpetrators, right? It wasn't me, it was masculinity, or it wasn't me, it was this dang rape culture that made me do it.
Right.
And also it leads men as a group to feel blamed, right? And that was actually the most hopeful thing that I have ever actually come across, as far as in a statement from an organization like that, that they acknowledge. Because what you have feminists saying, well, patriarchy, we hate patriarchy, we don't hate men. Well, then why did you name patriarchy after men?
Yeah.
Right? And aren't you completely dismissing the experience of another person, right? If these men say they feel blamed, right, then maybe there's some blame in there, right? And how can you just say, oh well, it, it wasn't our intention. It wasn't our intention to make you feel blamed, therefore you're not allowed to feel blamed, right? Um, no, that's not how it works. But one thing that a lot of MRAs kind of didn't really look closely at in the letter to the White House from Rain was that a lot of their suggestions as far as dealing with the problem of rape are totally aligned with the rape culture construct or concept. It's we need to educate men about consent, and we need to have a bystander program to watch out for women who might be victimized, and we need to educate these rapey men to not rape. So it's still it's a mixed bag. It really is. I don't think that it's some kind of wonderful breakthrough, other than the acknowledgement that men's feelings of being blamed might actually matter.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So is there, and I know this might sound like a ridiculous question, but I do have to ask, is there any validity to rape culture? And I guess I'm thinking that the whole idea came from the classical, pin her down kind of knife to the throat, ski mask in an alleyway kind of rape, violent rape. But is there any validity to rape culture? And you think that like Canadian university campus groups chanting some pretty bad songs, like the McMaster Red Suits or whatever. I mean, just to play devil's advocate, is there any validity to this concept?
I honestly, I don't think that that private conversations between individuals, over Facebook messages and stuff like that, especially, I spend a lot of my time with guys, and we joke about sex all the time, and I really don't think that that jokes about rape are part of rape culture. Um, I did, like rape culture originated. The term originated in a group of male prisoners, black men in prison, to describe what their environment was like.
An actual rape culture.
Yeah, and where the system basically, the guards would, if the guards were not the ones raping, the guards would be completely just, they see it happening and they just walk the other way. Um, and they look at it as part of the system. These guards would look at it as part of the system of punishment, part of what he deserves for landing his ass in jail. So, that is really, you can't transfer any of that onto general society. We don't see rape in outside society in those terms at all. We don't see it as justified in any way. Um, there may be, and here's the one, I don't think victim blaming either is part of some rape culture that causes rape or endorses or normalizes it. Victim blaming is a survival mechanism, right? It's internally in a victim of a traumatic event, there will be a quest for what did I do so that I can avoid doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there is an urge for you to look at your actions and see if your actions contributed to what happened to you, right? To the risk of bad things happening to you. And I think that uh, there's an impulse on the part of people who see someone who's been traumatized to try and learn a lesson from what happened to that person so that, I don't ever have to go through it. Right? So I think these are survival mechanisms and we're trying to stomp them out. And
the same thing can be said about, the hashtag kill all men. I mean, like, that initially I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of, screwed up. But then, you know what, whatever. If they want to joke about it, I sort of look at it the same way. And I enjoy Diana Davidson's rape joke of the week in her segments.
Yeah.
It's sort of like you cannot take it in the same, real context of like this is somebody who is actually planning to kill all men or somebody who's actually planning to endorse rape.
Well, what gets me too is that we joke about a whole bunch of really dark subjects. We joke about death. We joke about genocide. We joke about persecution. We joke about I think the Amazing Atheist. He said, "How many policemen does it take to change a light bulb? None. They just beat the room for being black." Basically saying these are ways that I look at dark humor as a way of, is basically like the bully in school tripped and landed face down in his lunch.
Yep.
Right? And now everybody's laughing at him.
Yep.
And they're not scared of him for that moment.
It's disempowering. It takes away the
power from the bad thing. So, you look at it like that, banning jokes just means that, like, you can never take the power away from rape, right? Rape is one of those things that they feel, these feminists feel, should never be diffused, right? Its power to horrify should always be, it should be ever present, right? And should always be taken seriously. And I just think that this is just like cruel way to look at things. It's just
it's like the Orwellian thought police. How dare you joke about something to disempower, to take the power away from it?
Yeah. So, but I do think that there are elements of a culture that normalizes and condones rape. I think that tends to happen most often in cases where women victimize men, right? Because
and I would probably suggest I imagine it takes place more in the southern states, but some judges who let off a football player when it might be obvious that he was guilty in rape, but it would look bad on the town if they were to convict him.
This is the thing. Nobody ever staged a community-wide cover-up when a football hero stole a chocolate bar, right? They only stage a cover-up when he did something that everybody knows is really bad, right? it's either rape or murder or armed robbery or something really horrible, and it's happening to someone on the inside, like Steubenville. Um, a lot of what happened there with the town wanting to bury it was you had this economically depressed town, right? Half the houses standing empty because people have left, right? All they have going for them is high school football, right?
Yeah.
And these guys are high school football stars. And the girl was not from that town. She was an outsider,
Yeah.
right? So you had basically, I mean, to say that this is rape culture, no, 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 no. This is cronyism and tribalism and, defending one's tribe from the outgroup
Right.
and hero worship and all kinds of other things at work, right? And once the outside world, once people who didn't have skin in the game, right, discovered what was going on there, the the response was almost universally, we're horrified. How could this town do this, right? And this poor girl, and let's nail these guys to the wall, right? So I mean, you once you had disinterested parties looking at the situation, you know, we were all horrified by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to say that it's rape culture because that town tried to bury that incident, no, that's not rape culture. That's classism and tribalism and cronyism and hero worship and all kinds of other things all working together to try and quash the knowledge of something that they know was really not good.
Right.
So,
Right. Um, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Are you able to talk a little longer?
a little bit.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Just let me know, okay?
All right.
Because I wanted to move on now with mixed messages. And just to give you a little background about myself, I was in sociology at York University before I came to Humber for journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really interested in the pickup community and social dynamics between men and women. And and I did see a lot of men using this to their advantage of trying to get women into bed and manipulating them or what have you. But I also saw it as a way for men to put their best selves forward in attracting a mate and etiquette and courtship and all that stuff. What I found is that a lot of women like a guy that takes charge. They like a guy that's going to be aggressive and not ask to be kissed or sort of throw her down on the bed and fuck her brains out, kind of. You know what I mean? Like
Women want to be ravished. If they didn't want to be ravished,
So
the romance
how
novel
is
industry
this
would look very different.
problematic when we have new definitions of enthusiastic consent? And what is that? What is enthusiastic consent? What are the problems in that dynamic there?
Well, basically, part of the enthusiastic consent thing is actually, I almost wish men would get together and decide, here's what we're all going to do. When we want to get hot and heavy with a woman, we're going to tell her to get out her pom-poms and beg. Show your enthusiasm, right? Because otherwise, I don't know if you're really into it.
Yeah.
Right? And the howls from women would be heard, in the stratosphere, right? Because they don't want to be in that position. I mean, they really don't. It's extremely even when you have a woman who can be sexually aggressive, like myself, right? Be the assertive one. Not all the time, not even most of the time. I don't want to be in that role, right? And so you look at men and women's fantasies. The fantasy women's fantasies of dominating men are the lowest of the low as far as what they think is enjoyable, right? And so you look at that, and we're really, really trying to rewrite sexual dynamics and rewrite human nature, and it ain't going to look pretty. I mean, there's nothing more that will turn a woman off more than a man who isn't acting attracted to her, right? And if he's actually sitting back and waiting for her to get really enthusiastic, the opposite's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just, as as a measure of, and most people, most sexual encounters don't, uh, they're not conversational,
Right.
right? I mean, you're not discussing what sex acts you're gonna do. At least you're not discussing them in a conversational way.
Right. It's body language. And,
Well, and it might be like roll over, right?
yeah.
Like sort of these clipped commands, or telling you just how to position yourself or whatever, right?
Right. Right.
But there's generally not, can I put it in your vagina now? Like,
Exactly.
what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can't, because now I just feel weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really, like, the whole idea of it. Um, like I said, women definitely want to. They have, at least in their fantasies, a desire to be ravished, and this is why romance novels play
Right.
out the way they do.
Exactly.
And that romance is the largest genre as far as number of books published in existence, right? And it's written
Lisa
almost
Gray or whatever that
entirely,
book was, right?
yeah, almost entirely by women for women.
Yeah.
And the alpha male is, the one who takes charge, the one who, is willing to pin her against the wall and ignore her verbal protests, her "we shouldn'ts" or "I can't" or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was even more pronounced in the '80s, where you actually would have the hero literally rape the heroine at the start of the book, and not sort of the oh, but she was consenting in her head and she secretly enjoyed it. No, like, some of these scenes were like of brutal rapes that traumatized the woman, but by the end of the book, he'd proved to her somehow that if she'd known him the way she knows him now, she would have consented back then. So it's almost like she retroactively gives her consent.
Well, and there wasn't that I forget the Clint Eastwood movie. It might be a few dollars more or a fistful of dollars. I don't know what it was, but
High,
I remember one of the opening scenes. He did exactly that. He took a girl out into the barn and he raped her.
oh, High Plains Drifter, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I just couldn't believe what I was. I'm like, okay, I guess that was acceptable back in the '70s, but
Oh yeah, no, and it was just like, yeah, that's probably rape, but it she kind of looks satisfied now.
it's true. Yeah.
It's like, it's just extremely complex. It's something that I don't think that you can just untangle it and say, okay, we're going to have this set of rules, and this set of rules is going to have to work for everybody, because this is the only acceptable way to have sex.
Yeah.
If they want to depopulate the earth, I guess that's the way to go. But because there'll be a lot fewer people having sex.
So, and I remember when you were getting involved with the "Don't Be That Girl" campaign, which I was I was very excited to see. You're getting some attention there.
Yeah.
But what is wrong with those kind of campaigns, and how can we better problem solve these? Instead of teaching men not to rape. I mean, obviously, that I don't see that as being very effective,
Well,
and painting all men as potential predators.
it's useless. It's useless in the sense that, but 94 to 96% of men on college campuses, which is, in the younger demographic, right, uh, don't rape, right? They don't engage in those behaviors, right? And they're horrified by the idea of rape. They're very sympathetic. You talk to one guy. He says, he started dating this girl. She basically told him that her ex had raped her, and he was horrified. He was shocked. He felt so much sympathy for her. He basically went out of his way to make life difficult for the guy. And then when she broke up with him, she told the same story about him to her next guy.
Oh my God!
Right? And he's like, so now I'm just like, I just totally, you know, harassed that guy for something that's probably not true, right? But so, I mean, like, men in general are really horrified by the idea of rape, and at least rape of women. And the very, very small number of men who engage in rape and sexual assault are recidivists who really don't care. They're not going to look at a poster and go, "Oh God, I didn't realize that was wrong this whole time."
I think Bill Burr, the comedian,
Mm-hmm.
he has some awesome material on this stuff. He's not. I think the quote was he's looking at the TV, and there's some like campaign going on for not to abuse women. He's like, "What do you think guys are looking at it going, oh my God, oh what am I doing? Oh oopsie daisy, sweetheart, there you go. I didn't realize it was not okay
Yeah.
to do that, like."
Yeah. But now I know, like it's really it's ridiculous to think that those kinds of campaigns are going to reach the kinds of men who do this stuff. Now there is something to be said for social censure, right? If guys are going to behave in these ways and other people around them are going to be like, yeah, no, that's not cool, dude, right?
Yeah.
That will actually reduce some of that behavior. Right, and I think we've seen this just with because we've had so many campaigns about violence against women is wrong, blah blah blah. People are much more likely to report when their neighbor is beaten on his wife or whatever. They're more likely to not want to talk with that guy over the fence, right? After after you've listened to them going at it and him beating the crap out of her the night before. Yeah, I don't want nothing to do with you because you're scum. Right. So I mean, there's those things, but as far as like teaching these guys, by saying it's wrong or it's a crime, I mean, like a lot of these guys already they know it's wrong, they know it's a crime, they go out of their way to not get caught.
Right. Psychopaths.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of them have sort of personality traits that are common in the cluster B personality disorders, narcissistic, borderline, things like that, and so. You're looking at a pathology,
right?
And what the "Don't Be That Guy" campaign and what rape culture kind of does is basically saying that society normalizes rape. It's almost like if there was ever a campaign to make rapists feel better about themselves, this is it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm not a sociopath. I'm not behaving in a pathological way. I'm actually just doing what the culture tells me. I'm just expressing normal masculinity, right?
Oh, that's an interesting point.
All guys do this, right? I'm just normal.
It's like that campaign is backfiring on what the feminists intended for it to do.
Well, I don't know whether it is, but I would assume that this would be the message that those guys would take from it. Is that like you look at someone like Hugo Schweitzer and all of the I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's pretty scummy guy, taught women's studies or gender studies at down in California, Pasadena City College, and he's done some really horrendous things. He's slept with his female students and he cuckolded a man, basically, had sex with a woman, sired a child, and then stayed silent when she convinced the other guy that the child was his, right? He's just done all kinds of really, really nasty things, and I think that the main attraction he has to feminism and the feminist movement is it wasn't me doing any of those things. It was masculinity. It's part of a larger problem of masculinity, right? And so therefore I don't have to necessarily take responsibility for any of those things I've done. Right, because it wasn't actually me; it was the cultural construct of masculinity that's responsible for me having done those things.
So, and where can I go? I was reading that most of these rapists, and I know largely that the perpetrators of rape or sexual assault might be primarily men, but it's also repeat offenders. And like you were saying on campus, like 96% of the male population is not engaging in rape. So where can I find some of these statistics?
Well, Dr. David Lisak did a comprehensive study on where he basically interviewed college men, and he found the numbers basically as far as undetected rapists, right? Didn't ask them if they'd ever raped a woman, asked them, have you ever had sex with someone when they didn't want to? when you knew they didn't want to because you used physical force or whatever, right?
What's his name? Lisak?
Lisak, Lisak, and he's actually quite popular in feminist circles. He's pretty well respected just in general,
Mm-hmm.
and he found that 4% of college men were responsible for 90% of the rapes on campus.
Wow.
And that 2% of men engaged in, rape or attempted rape once. So, and given how we look at rape, it could well be that some of those guys, some of those one-timers could be, recidivists at the start of their careers, but they could also be men who, had consensual sex and the woman didn't feel good about it afterwards, and so they take responsibility for that and they believe that they raped somebody, when in reality that might not be the case.
Right. Well, and it's like looking at. I remember after James Taranto came out with the Drunkenness and Double Standards article, the Young Turks and Anna Kasparian was talking about how at least she was giving some legitimacy to the ridiculousness of two consenting adults who haven't had some alcohol are somehow both raped. But she was saying that the FBI was only reporting that false rape allegations are so minimal. It's like only 8%. But how do we determine a successful rape? I mean, if both were under the influence of alcohol and that's determined a successful rape statistic, then how do they have a proper,
well, on top of that, one of the things is that when you're looking at criminal statistics, and sort of what the local police department says is their ratio or their percentage of false reports. They're not taking every single report of rape and investigating it in both directions.
Right.
That 2% that the Edmonton Police Services says is only 2% of reports to our department are false. Those are the ones where evidence of falsity landed in their laps while they were investigating the claim as true.
Right, or the person the girl came forward.
Even in those cases, sometimes, and here's one of the horrible, tricky things, is that feminists are trying to basically say that when women recant, often you can't take that as a false rape accusation because they're only recanting to stop the process.
Oh my God.
Right. So, and that may well be the case in some cases, but you have this huge gray area, so maybe 2 to 6% of reports to police are considered to be definitely false, and 6% of reports to police end in conviction. So we can sort of say that most of those are definitely true, not all of them, because men do go to prison after being falsely accused.
Yeah, where they go and they're likely to get raped.
Yeah, but you have this huge swath of cases in the middle that we don't know either way. And so one of the things that really bugs me is the refusal on the part of feminists when they're repeating that statistic, whether it's 2% or 6% or 8%, they say only 2% are false, when in reality 2% in that case is the lower bound, right? And 94% would be the upper bound, and it's somewhere in between that would be the actual number of false reports. We just don't know, and the police, there's no political will on the part of the police to actually take a case that just sort of seems a little bit wishy-washy, right? And
Yeah.
they don't really have enough evidence to take it to trial or to take it any further, right? They're not going to turn back around and investigate to see whether the report was false.
Right.
They're just going to drop the case.
Right.
So, yeah, there's just no reliable way of tracking what number of or what percentage of reports to the police are false as far as rape goes.
Yeah.
Especially when the evidence is often completely ambiguous. Evidence of rape, the physical evidence of rape is often merely the physical evidence of a legal act, sex, right? And often 80% of cases it occurs in a context where you might reasonably expect that two people would agree to have sex.
Yeah.
Right? They're dating, they're at a party, they're in a relationship, whatever.
Right.
And one of the interesting things is that the conviction rate, so like the 6% of reports end in conviction, that's the attrition rate. The conviction rate, the number brought to trial that end in conviction, that's actually right on par with any other serious felony. It's like 56% or something like that. It's similar to murder, similar to armed robbery, right? The conviction rate for those. So
but why is it seen as not high enough? Like, why are we? I mean, I hear a lot about how feminists say, "Well, it's not high enough. It's too many men are getting away with it, or whatever."
Well, I think I don't know what the attrition rates are for things like homicide, but I would assume that the attrition rate is higher for something like homicide because at least you have like if you have a dead body with a bullet in it, right? You know that a crime was committed. Right? You know that there is no way that person consented to being shot by somebody, right? And so there's certain elements of the crime of the actus reus, the what's called the guilty act, right? That you don't have to prove the actus reus. You just have to prove mens rea, and you have to attach the perpetrator to the victim through evidence, or to the crime through evidence, right? With something like rape, you actually have to prove actus reus as well as all of those other things because sex is a legal act, and because the only physical evidence you might have is going to look exactly like the physical evidence of a legal act.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
how and just to end things off here, how can men and women protect themselves? What should their responsibilities be, respectively?
Oh God, how can men and women protect themselves? I think like being aware of any situation you're in. I don't think men or women should be getting totally blotto at parties. And I'm not even talking just about being victimized sexually. I'm talking about waking up with somebody drew a penis on your face in Sharpie, right? Or somebody stole your iPhone, or they pulled your pants down and took pictures of you and uploaded them to the internet. I mean, like, there's all kinds of horrible things that can happen to you when you're passed out at a party, or staggering home drunk. You get mugged, you get victimized, you get rolled by people who want your jacket, and then left in a snowbank, right? I mean, there's all kinds of nasty things that can happen to people when they're out of control of themselves, right? So that would be the main thing. And I think as far as protecting yourself when you're walking at night and things like that, just look like you have a place to go, right? And a time to get there. And don't be wearing your earbuds, right? Because, and I don't think that's an issue with necessarily sexual assault. I think that's an issue with muggings and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly, I think that the level of danger that feminists want to think that especially women are in is completely overblown. Like I've never been assaulted walking at night, and I've never been scared of walking at night, so I've never avoided doing it. My boyfriend, before he was 21, right, had been assaulted 3 times, had his nose broken twice while walking at night, right? So, you kind of look at that, and feminists will tell us, men don't have to be afraid walking alone at night. Well, no, men don't feel afraid Maybe they should feel afraid walking at night, and maybe women should feel less afraid. You don't have to feel afraid. And I think that that actually being afraid translates into your body language, and that's what will often, especially if you're a woman, make you a target. Right? Looking vulnerable. So, or behaving as if you're vulnerable. So I just think, basically just being vigilant rather than being apprehensive and scared is probably the way to go.
Is there anything that you wanted to ask me, or anything you wanted to add before we end up?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we've covered most of the stuff. If I think of anything, I can email it to you. So, but and I'll email you some of the info with the community of the wrongly accused, some of that, and there's a blog called Yes Means Yes, that you might want to look up, which does sort of an analysis of two studies, Dr. Lisak's study of campus rapists and another similarly done study in the military. So, yeah, you can. I think it's called Meet the Predators. Yes means yes, meet the predators. So that's where I would go looking to see, as far as the percentage of men that commit sexual violence. So.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take a look if you come across it or you have some time to send it to me. That'd be great.
Sure.
Yeah. When are you going on Joe Rogan?
Oh God. I think he chickened out.
I think so. Eh?
I think he did. He was his talent booker was so enthusiastic, announced it publicly on the Joe Rogan subreddit, right? That they were going to have me on. They just needed to work out details of when and blah. And I haven't heard anything since.
Aww.
Actually, a couple months later, I think he went on. He either went on that subreddit or he sent me a message or something, and said, it's still in the works, or it's, we're still interested, right? But it's just, okay, well, whenever.
Well, I hope you get a chance to go on. That'd be so cool. I know he was talking to Stefan Molyneux about some of this stuff, and I'm a big fan of Stefan, so.
Yeah, no, I know that they fundamentally disagreed on a couple of things too. I think Joe said something about why are MRAs drawing attention to prison rape? It doesn't make men look good because it's men doing all the raping there.
Right.
And it's just like that. Like we're not in this to make men look good. And number two, it's like, so if the LGBT community wanted to draw attention to violence in lesbian relationships, you'd tell them to, well, it's women beating on women in that case, so, and it doesn't make women look good, so, keep it under wraps. Don't mention it. Right? It's basically that's sort of a victim-perpetrator equivalence. Because it's a man doing it to a man, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Or it all evens out, or I don't even know how the justification goes. And it really does ignore a lot of sexual predation in juvenile facilities and prison facilities that occurs between female staff and the inmates.
Right.
So.
I was just reading a recent study by Brian H. French's talking about how coerced sex is a lot more prevalent than we think, and that 43% of high school boys and young college men are reported to have unwanted sex with 95% of female aggressors.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and some of the numbers for female sexual aggression are really, really high, like self-reporting. Right, when women are asked, "Have you ever, tried to get sex from an unwilling man because he was drunk or whatever?" Right, things like that. The numbers, I read this one sort of compilation of numbers from a bunch of different studies, and they ranged from 15% of women reporting, yes, I've held a man down or used a weapon or used threats or blackmail, or I've taken advantage of him when he's incapacitated, right? 15%, right? And in some populations, up to 40% of women have reported doing this, right? And they might not do it as often, right? They may not be, the pattern for women may not be recidivism, but it certainly seems to be quite a normal thing for women to engage in, right? Like sort of the way social drinking is considered normal and alcoholism is a pathology. The occasional female sexual aggressor is, normal, like social drinking, and the recidivist male rapist is the pathology. So.
Well, here's hoping for change. I can't thank you enough for talking with me today. It's been a real pleasure, and I remember this morning I was feeling so giddy because I've admired you from afar for so long, and actually now I'm getting a chance to speak with you. So so thank you so much.
Oh no, thanks. It was fun actually. So,
Cool.
and
Well, I'll keep you posted. I believe my article is due in about a week or two.
all right.
I'll keep you posted when it's all done. But yeah, thanks again, and keep doing what you're doing.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye.